If you could travel back 5 years and knew what the future held, could you guarantee you'd be a billionaire today? What if the probability of something happening tomorrow is less than 5%, but someone invested their money 5 years in advance to prepare for this event? What does that mean? For example, you're perfectly healthy today with no illnesses whatsoever. So, unless something unexpected happened, the probability of you dying tomorrow is less than 5%, right? But now, someone bought you an insurance policy 5 years ago, betting that you die the day after tomorrow. If you die, the insurance company pays them out. Do you think they're crazy? Because even if you bet today that you die tomorrow, the probability is already less than 5%. And this person bet 5 years in advance that you die tomorrow. Isn't that probability even lower than 5%? Perhaps even close to 0%? But this person bet correctly. Everyone. You may not believe Trump. You may not believe Musk. You may not believe money's in. But there's one person you absolutely must believe because he might be a prophet or even a time traveler. And if he's not one of these identities, then it's even more terrifying. Because he may have participated in planning everything in this world, he can make a strategic move 5 to 6 years in advance. And this person is called the stock market guru, Warren Buffett. Hello everyone, I'm Money Zen. During the 2008 financial crisis, countless American banks collapsed. But why is the United States still the world's largest economy today? Because the rest of the world cannot allow it to fail. The United States has set a trap, putting the whole world in it. In any business transaction, if you, Japan, want to buy goods from Europe, you can't use yen or euros. You can only use dollars. When the world's earnings and expenditures are all in dollars, can the United States simply print money to buy everything in the world? So every penny American spends today is the hard-earned money of all of us. So the question is, why do we need dollars? Can we not use dollars? You'll find that in the 1970s, the dollar was decoupled from gold, and people no longer trusted the dollar, feeling that they couldn't exchange their dollars for gold, so the dollar collapsed. Then, what happened? The United States flew to the Middle East and started a war. After the Middle East was defeated and rendered powerless, the dollar was linked to oil. The world needs oil for development, and to buy oil, the world must use the US dollar. In the 1990s, many US banks collapsed, and Europe created the euro. When the world stopped using the dollar, the Gulf War and the Kosovo War occurred. As a result, 30% of the euro's value was wiped out. The world had to continue using the dollar. In 2000, the US dot-com bubble burst, and the US drastically lowered interest rates. Logically, with the US economy collapsing and interest rates so low, shouldn't the world's money be withdrawn from the US stock market or borrowed from US banks and invested in other high-return countries? When the world sold dollars, shouldn't the dollar collapse and plummet? Instead, the dollar surged, meaning everyone was buying dollars. Why? Because war broke out in Afghanistan and Iraq? Then what? The 2008 financial crisis and the US unlimitedly lowered interest rates, quantitative easing, and the printed money. Shouldn't the dollar become worthless? Then war broke out in North Africa and the Middle East, and capital flowed into the US again. During the 2020 pandemic, the US once again printed money without limit. Before the money was even fully printed, Russia and Ukraine went to war, and the dollar continued to appreciate. Everyone, I'm not saying the US started all these wars. I've just observed a pattern. Whenever people start to avoid using the dollar, it's either because the US is experiencing an economic crisis or because the US is about to lower interest rates and expand its balance sheet by printing more money. And then war breaks out in the world. Last December 2025, just 1 month after the US announced its interest rate cuts and balance sheet expansion, the US flew to Venezuela and arrested its president. The reason given by the US was to prevent Venezuela from continuing to sell drugs to Americans. But you'll find that many countries sell drugs even more aggressively than Venezuela. Yet this time, it was Venezuela that was targeted. Why? And then, you'll be surprised to find that the biggest winner in this Venezuelan crisis is actually Warren Buffett. And he laid this trap 5 to 6 years in advance. Let's assume he doesn't have the ability to foresee the future. So, from the perspective of the US and capitalists, what are they really after? If we know what they foresaw, can we follow suit and make our own moves? I rarely talk about this kind of topic, but if more countries will disappear or be ruled in the future, if more people will become slaves, and more people's wealth will be confiscated and redistributed as part of the world's resources and wealth, then I have to say something. In the next 2 episodes, I will talk about how this situation is likely to unfold in 2026, and how these things will affect our wealth. If you don't want to be a passive bystander or a victim, or even if you hope to use this situation to cross social classes, then you can subscribe to my channel, because you expect me to give you more information later. And if you're afraid that you'll forget what you heard and it will be a waste of your time, then you can like this video so that it will automatically be added to your playlist so you can come back and follow along anytime. First of all, Venezuela is the country with the most oil in the world. So as soon as its president was arrested, the US government came out and said that Venezuela no longer needs to worry about its oil fields. From now on, it will be handed over to our American oil companies to take over. And we will not lose a penny from Venezuela by making money from its oil, because there are huge profits to be made. Everyone! When I heard this, it sent shivers down my spine. Think about Buffett. What has he done in recent years? In 2019, Tesla started dominating other stocks, telling the world that the era of electric cars was coming. Batteries and solar power would replace oil. And do you know what Buffett did? He immediately poured money into Occidental Petroleum. While everyone else was jumping ship and shifting their money to new energy, Buffett not only got on board, but he chose the oldest and most obsolete ship. And then, in 2020, the pandemic hit. All planes were grounded. People didn't need to work, and there were countless fewer cars on the streets. As a result, oil prices plummeted to negative territory. You not only didn't have to pay for oil, but the seller even paid you. In other words, Buffett was immediately trapped after buying Occidental Petroleum. And then, he immediately poured money into another oil company called Chevron. And in the past few years, as we all know, he's been selling off his stock holdings and holding massive amounts of cash. But you'll find that whenever oil prices fall, he'll use his money to continue buying Occidental Petroleum and Chevron. Then, without you even realizing it, these 2 companies have become major holdings for him, or he's already gained control of them. So, in recent years, when AI-related companies have skyrocketed, he either stays out of the market or buys oil companies. And he buys these 2 out of so many other oil companies. Why? When everyone laughed at this investment guru, saying he was old and crazy, he laughed 5 to 6 years later. Not because oil prices have surged today, but because after the US took over Venezuela, Buffett's 2 companies will directly gain actual control and extraction rights over this giant oil field. This is a $1 trillion underground ATM. What does this mean? In 1975, other countries went to Venezuela to make money from oil. Venezuela then nationalized the oil industry and confiscated the oil assets of foreign companies. Occidental Petroleum was sued for bribery. They paid some money and their assets were confiscated. Because of this, some of Occidental Petroleum's assets were confiscated. So today, in 2026, with the US having arrested your president, Occidental Petroleum will most likely be able to get back the assets that were confiscated back then. It's like having a debt that's been uncollectible, causing the company's value to decline. Then, after Buffett bought in at the bottom, this debt is now highly likely to be recovered. This transforms what looks like an old, dilapidated ship back into a luxury cruise ship. Not only that, but there is also Chevron. Normally, ordinary oil wells just gushed out the oil once you drill. But while Venezuelan oil wells have a lot of oil, it's very heavy. Extracting this oil requires very high costs and technology, and there are only a handful of companies in the world that can master this technology to its fullest potential and still make money. Chevron is one of the masters. When all the American oil companies were driven out of Venezuela, only Chevron reluctantly stayed. Because of this, only Chevron has an intimate understanding of every oil field facility and technology in Venezuela. And because of this, now that the US wants to send its own company to Venezuela to work on oil, only Chevron can do it. He doesn't need to rebuild his team, nor does he need to spend years exploring oil fields again and investing in new technology development. He can start immediately. To put it simply, Venezuelan oil, barring unforeseen circumstances, will now essentially be monopolized by Buffett's two oil companies. So here's the key point. What did Buffett see 5 or 6 years ago? South America has always been America's backyard, a backyard where they can come and go as they please. And what has this backyard done in recent years? Previously, the world wanted to buy Venezuelan oil, Colombian copper mines, Peruvian lithium mines, Chilean silver, and Brazilian iron ore, all priced and paid for in US dollars. Now, they're priced and paid for in RMB. What does this mean? The world's food chain has 3 layers with the United States at the very top. They are responsible for printing money and then spending it to buy things. In other words, the United States is the customer, the consumer. The middle layer consists of manufacturers. They are responsible for taking orders, producing, and earning processing fees. Finally, at the bottom are those who provide resources. For example, as mentioned earlier, South America, this backyard, has abundant oil and copper mines, and they make money by selling these. So, top-level capitalists propose an economic strategy called specialization. Each country focuses on its strengths, selling oil, manufacturing clothes, printing money. Once everyone has done their part, the whole world can do business together. The US prints money to buy goods, and manufacturing countries use that money to buy resources. Resource-rich countries make money and then use it to buy US Treasury bonds and weapons, which the US then uses to protect them. The money, after going around in circles, ends up back in the US. This is globalization and specialization. But if you're a bit smarter, you'll realize what happens if the manufacturing countries and the resource-rich countries bypass the US dollar and trade directly in RMB or other currencies. For example, if Chinese factories could directly use RMB to buy Brazilian iron ore and Chilean silver, wouldn't the US at the very top be completely sidelined? Wouldn't the dollars it prints become a pile of worthless paper? This is de-dollarization. This is why 5 to 6 years ago, when the US, its backyard, began de-dollarization, Buffett already foresaw that the US would definitely rewrite the rules. Friends, I've seen some people online discussing who would win if the US and China went to war right now. I don't know who would win, but one thing I'm certain of is that for every 1,000 enemies killed, 800 of our own would be lost. Therefore, military strategy tells us, if the strength is roughly equal, don't fight. Even if I'm stronger than you, don't fight. So when can we fight? When we can subdue the enemy without fighting. For example, this time, directly arresting the president of Venezuela. This kind of battle with a huge disparity in strength, a battle of overwhelming power, is a good opportunity to fight. So you can think about it. If the US at the very top controls the resource-rich countries at the very bottom, what about the manufacturing countries in between? It's simple. Today, I am your customer. You want to earn money from me. At the same time, I am also your supplier. If you want to do business, you must buy my resources. In other words, aren't the costs of your business determined by me? Aren't the profits you earn from your business also determined by me? If I don't give you money to earn or resources to process, will I cripple you? Most importantly, the vast majority of the world's copper, silver, and lithium mines are in South America. These resources are crucial raw materials for AI batteries, mobile phones, computers, and satellites. In other words, whoever controls these resources controls the lifeline of the world's future, high technology. Hearing this, you'll realize that Buffett's 5 major Japanese trading companies already control 12 billion of iron ore, 16% of copper ore, and 12% of lithium ore worldwide. Even Venezuelan oil is in Buffett's hands. This means Buffett's strategy is no longer about making money from a few companies' stocks. He's using capital to rewrite the world order. He doesn't work on AI or technology himself. But in the future, if you want to work on AI or technology, you'll need to find not only the US, but also Buffett behind the US. Do you understand? Okay, many people don't know that the United States is now the world's largest oil exporter and one of the world's largest oil consumers. Simply put, the US sells oil and buys oil, and it's the world's largest buyer. So here's the crucial point. Now that Venezuela, the world's largest oil producer, is in the hands of the US, does that mean it will ship all its oil back to the US? Of course not. Venezuelan oil isn't particularly cheap to begin with, let alone ship it there. So, what the US really wants is control. When the US controls the world's largest oil reserves, it becomes the world's most powerful market manipulator. When it needs to suppress oil prices, it can say it will increase production and intensify its oil extraction efforts in the future. When the world believes there will be plenty of oil in the future, oil prices will fall. Conversely, when the US isn't drilling for or selling oil, oil prices will be driven up. Here's the key point. What does it mean when the US can manipulate oil prices at will? Take a look at this chart. It's simple. The red line represents oil prices and the blue line represents US inflation. You'll notice that the red and blue lines almost always move in tandem. This means that when oil prices rise, US inflation may also rise. The higher the oil price, the higher the overall price of goods. Why? Even though energy only accounts for 8% of the US price index, meaning oil isn't the most crucial factor influencing US inflation, they still rise and fall together. Why? It's simple. The US is a country built on roads. Almost all transportation relies on cars and trucks. This means that whether transporting food or clothing, it all depends on cars. And cars rely on gasoline. If oil prices rise, transportation costs rise, and the cost of most goods sold in the US will increase. In other words, what the US really wants to control isn't just oil prices, but the inflation they cause. That is, if the US can lower oil prices, it can also lower inflation. Then the Federal Reserve has no reason to refuse to cut interest rates. So, if we piece all the pieces together, you'll find that if the US controls oil and inflation, it can cut interest rates and print money. Because cutting interest rates and printing money won't trigger further inflation, but the dollar might depreciate. Nobody wants to hold their dollars because there's no interest in depositing money in the US. But what if the US could acquire all the resources in South America next? At this point, to avoid risk, global capital will not only flow back to the US, but more importantly, the US controls global resources, which also means it controls the future development of AI and technology. Therefore, capital will flow back to invest in the US. In other words, as long as the US doesn't have enough money, it can still print money to buy up everything the world has worked so hard to produce, and you will still have to use the US dollar. Then, to save their economies, your countries will have no choice but to print money along with the US. Globally, the value of our money will depreciate, while the US dollar may appreciate. This is why I haven't given up on investing in gold and silver in the past year or two. If you have a better understanding of today's video, brothers and sisters with different opinions are welcome to leave comments and discuss rationally with us. If you find some details unclear, I suggest you watch my first 2 or 3 videos, because the logic is interconnected. Due to time constraints, I have to end here. But what are your expectations for the next episode? Many people eagerly await this moment each week. It's crucial. Okay, so every Sunday at 8:30 p.m., I'll continue sharing free information on becoming wealthy, an entrepreneur, and an investor to achieve financial freedom. If you don't want to miss it, I urge you to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. Then, please share the video generously. I sincerely wish all the brothers and sisters who like this video will achieve financial freedom soon. If you can find even one or two useful sentences in what I've shared today that can help you live a better life, I'll be perfectly content. Alright, see you next week. Bye!